Hi, and welcome to this week's episode of Extra Serving, a Nation's Restaurant News podcast. I am your host, Holly Petrie. This week, we are continuing our discussion about this quarter's earnings. Since we last gathered for the pod with two different co-hosts, several brands have reported, including Bloomin Brands, El Pollo Loco, and Texas Roadhouse. We mentioned Texas Roadhouse last week, anticipating the brand's positive returns, and that is exactly the case. The brand saw 4% traffic growth just behind Chipotle, and same-store sales of almost 8% across the system. That, as we talked about last week, is definitely an anomaly. Much like KFC last week, Wendy's is looking towards its international market for help during this rough time. Meanwhile, Shake Shack and El Pollo Loco are investing heavily in kiosks and seeing returns. And much like we talked about last week, speed of service is key for many brands, and that includes family dining brands as well. First Watch is now investing in technology to speed up service time for customers. This week, there will be 3 interviews from the Restaurant Leadership Conference for you to listen to. And now it's time to introduce my co-hosts.
I'm Sam Okus, Editor-in-Chief of Nation's Restaurant News.
And I'm Leanne Zinsmeister, Managing Editor of Nation's Restaurant News.
You know, before we started, Sam, you mentioned, did we talk about Starbucks, which our listeners will know. We talked a lot about Starbucks, just to catch you guys up. Because I know you guys are avid listeners of the podcast, but just in case you weren't listening.
Who listens to their own podcast? Come on.
Truly.
We talked about Starbucks' speed of service and Chipotle's speed of service and how different they were and how that might be the future of how brands are differentiating themselves. So that's kind of our main point. So let's dive into earnings because we have a lot to talk about. I will mention, right as we were getting ready to record, Dutch Bros reported. And so I just want to read some of their numbers so everyone is familiar with it. Their revenue grew 39% for the first quarter, and they were up 10% in same-store sales growth. They also had some interesting things that we'll talk about later, but there are just some numbers from Dutch Bros to get you guys started. So, Sam, what are some of your takeaways from the past week?
Other than that, I'm tired. Well, it seems like, let's start here. You guys talked about Starbucks and Yum last week, so I won't dive so much into that. But it did feel a little bit after Starbucks and Yum like the sky was falling. Because here you have 2 of the biggest companies, food service companies in the world, who are uncharacteristically underperforming. That we talked as a team that, oh no, what's about to happen? It just felt suddenly very much like there was something happening in the industry that maybe everything was about to collapse or something. I don't know. Thankfully, after this week, I think it is not all doom and gloom. It's very clear that there are winners and losers, right? And Starbucks and Yum are not used to being part of the loser side of things. And I wouldn't expect that to stay that way for very long. But when you look at the winners of right now, you know, I just think there's a stark difference between winners and losers. And maybe you mentioned this last week, but, you know, thinking about Wingstop and how Wingstop just blew it out of the park the same week that Starbucks and Yum were suffering, to me was like, here's where we're kind of drawing the line. Here's where, like, you know, the differences between the winners and the losers. You have these, you know, smaller, more nimble, more fresh kind of brands, I guess you could say, that are adapting quickly, you know, a lot of investment in technology. And it's not to say, obviously, Starbucks and Yum are invested in technology too, but again, it's a little bit more of the I don't even want to call Wingstop a startup, right? Because it's huge, but it's still it's able to pivot a lot more quickly than the Yums and Starbucks of the world, and it's adapting quickly. So then now we talk about Dutch Bros as a great example because 10% same-store sales growth, like 40% revenue growth is like monumental, but we all know that Dutch Bros is opening restaurants just like every day, it seems like. So, you know, looking more at the same-store sales numbers to really understand, like, oh, maybe this is why Starbucks is struggling, right? Like Dutch Bros is swooping in, and it's not just Dutch Bros, and I can share in a little bit as I just wrote about the coffee category, but it's like you have on in this corner the exciting startup brand like a Dutch Bros, and in that corner the old stalwart Starbucks. And when one is doing very well and one's not doing well, I think you can start to understand again where some of the momentum lies. It's not true across the board, and I'll let Leanne weigh in, but I just think that, the exciting players that have been exciting continue to be exciting. The older legacy brands, they're the ones that suddenly have hit the skids. And I think it's, I'll tie it up in a lot of things, but of course, traffic continues to be the number one reason, I'm sure, why these companies are just not able to, catch any momentum.
Yeah, it's interesting. We do have a lot of clear winners and losers this quarter, but we also have a ton of brands whose same store sales are within 2% of breaking even. So it kind of feels like the name of the game is like just stay alive. And then we have a handful that are doing really well and a handful that are doing really poorly. But to Sam's point, the real loser this week, I hate to use that word, but the company that did the worst was Fat Brands. And they do own a lot of those legacy brands. Smoky Bones is their newest, but Twin Peaks. Now I know, Sam, you were at a Twin Peaks this week, and so maybe you'll help
first trip. That's right.
dig them out next quarter. Maybe it'll be a little better thanks to you.
That $12 burger I bought, I bet it's going to go a long way.
But that's just another example of some of those stalwarts are struggling. And some of the younger, fresher, more exciting brands are doing well. One of the brands I was a little surprised to see had, I think, 5% same-store sales jump was El Pollo Loco. I feel like they've been on the struggle list for a while, so good for them. But that brings me to the speed of service thing that Holly was talking about and that I know our listeners are well versed in at this point. But El Pollo Loco and Shake Shack both mentioned kiosks as being one of the keys to their success last quarter. Shake Shack was one of those closer to breaking even companies. So I've been surprised to see some of the kiosk chatter because I kind of feel like kiosks are the technology of 5 years ago. But they're still chugging along. I know the Shake Shacks here have had kiosks for a long time. El Pollo Loco is still rolling them out system-wide, but I guess if you don't have kiosks, that still be something to consider to bring in. I know that's also a labor-saving opportunity for El Pollo Loco in particular. They're based in California. So yeah, it's just been interesting to see. There have been several calls this quarter that have made me go, oh, interesting. I would have expected to see that news several years ago and not this week in 2024. But I guess don't write off the things that feel a little more old school at this point.
Yeah, it's funny you say that about kiosks because you're right. I mean, it really did feel like kiosks really had their day in the sun 2017, 2018. And then you had the haters who are like, kiosks, come on, kiosks are not the future. Well, I don't think the kiosk in and of itself, the technology of the kiosk, I don't think is the exciting thing. I think the exciting thing or the lesson here, the key insight is whatever ways in which you can improve throughput and increase speed of service, whether that's a kiosk or, Holly, as you mentioned, First Watch, they're doing pay at the table, which as a First Watch fan with one right by my house, I have done this and it is so easy. I mean, it's the best, right? Because First Watch forever was like, take your check up to the, cashier on your way out kind of a brand. And as an elder millennial, of course, I'm allergic to human reaction or human interaction. So I really like the pay at the table option. But most importantly, it is convenient and quick. And so I think, again, it's not necessarily the kiosk that I think is the exciting thing here. I just think it is restaurants are finding ways to speed things up. And as I will scream to the rooftops until I'm blue in the face, and Leanne knows this because I just wrote it in my editor's letter for May, value today is really... it has become really, whereas it was always portion size, quality, and price point, I truly believe speed of service, convenience, and accessibility are becoming more and more a part of that value equation, that customers aren't just looking for affordable food. And as Joanna Fantozzi, our colleague, has a story coming out here in the next couple of weeks, you'll find out about the new value equation. Yes, customers still want the cheapest price. However, because they're all so much more on the move, on the go, speed of service is really, really crucial. I mean, look at Dutch Bros, right? And the generation of coffee, drive-through only coffee concepts. Like, speed of service is really what's it all about. I don't have to get out of my car, and it goes really fast. So I think that's what you have to focus on here. Is a lot of the winners seem to be focused on the operational components, the service components, throughput, and speed of service.
Well, that's a lot of what we were talking about last week, because Starbucks talked about maybe rolling out digital menu boards, which are not new by any stretch of the imagination. And that just shows that Starbucks is notorious for long waits. Like, that is, Starbucks is known for, there is no question. Like, Starbucks is known for, your drink's gonna take a while, deal with it. And they're introducing all these new things. And so last week we were talking about how they're adding all these new SKUs, they're adding complexities. This is just going to make it slower and more complicated. But they're also introducing things like boba, which Dutch Bros, like, that's a direct, and energy drinks. Those are direct comparisons to Dutch Bros. They are trying to catch up with Dutch Bros, and Dutch Bros is showing that it is still the leader with their sales growth, with their unit count. They are becoming, I mean, they're not nearly as profitable as Starbucks. I want to just state that. But they're moving up there, and they're gaining traction. And, they introduced a mobile order. They're about to introduce a mobile order. And Leanne, you said on Slack that it's like Chick-fil-A being open on Sundays. Like, this is going to be massive for Dutch Bros to have this new avenue. So I'm interested to see how they grow using new technology, but they almost remind me of like a Texas Roadhouse, where they haven't really invested in that technology as heavily as other brands have, but they've still been crushing it. So it's interesting. I mean, we're not surprised by Texas Roadhouse. There's no question they were going to do great. But it's interesting to see how Dutch Bros is navigating new technology that could speed them up even further.
Well, and if I could just explore the coffee thing really quick too, because I think this is an interesting part of it that you bring up with the boba and Starbucks and with energy drinks. So I dusted off my old writing capabilities and dove into the coffee category for our May issue. So you'll soon be able to read that. And what I was exploring was the drive-through only coffee concepts like Dutch Bros, Seven Brew, Human Bean, Scooters, Big B, which have suddenly become everywhere. And we're talking about them all the time, and really why that is. And so it's fascinating because, of course, the big two things here are coffee is the second most popular beverage behind water, and 67% of American adults have coffee daily. And also, the drive-through only concepts are maximizing, real estate opportunities by doing these very small footprints that they can just pop into every, parking lot in America, right? So really limitless potential here for that category. But as many of those leaders were quick to point out, your growth cannot be in footprint alone. So Dutch Bros, I don't know their AUV off the top of my head, but let's just say 1 million AUV. If they just put a restaurant here with 1 million AUV, restaurant here with 1 million AUV, restaurant here with 1 million AUV, that's okay. Yeah, naturally you're going to grow because you have location growth, but you also have the mandate to, grow your AUV. You have to also find incremental growth with your sales opportunities. And that's where these other beverages come in, right? And so where energy drinks and boba, all of the coffee concepts, especially as they start to saturate markets, then the next lever of growth has to be menu growth. And for the vast majority of them, that can't include food because it messes with the whole speed of service part of things. And also there's the equipment and everything. So beverage innovation will be driving these coffee concepts for the next several years. And as our colleague Robert Burns over at Technomic pointed out to me as part of that story, he was like, coffee's a commodity. Any innovation you do in coffee and in beverage, once, one of these brands does it, all of them will do it because nobody owns that, right? So that's where you're seeing all of these take off. But if I bring it back to Starbucks really quickly, Starbucks, if for the first time maybe ever, is playing from a position of weakness in that it was always all about the vibe. It was always about the third place. And suddenly they're getting their lunch eaten by these convenience and accessibility and drive-through oriented concepts that are all having more beverages that are, available. And so I find that all really interesting because Starbucks, of course, is building more drive-through locations now. Talking about digital menu boards, which is, a big component of the drive-through coffee chains, and is going to innovate in its beverages because it has to. It's the only way to keep up and to compete.
I pulled a Leanne and looked up Dutch Bros AUVs, 2 million. Yep.
I should have guessed that.
You should have guessed that. $2 million.
Oh, well.
They are, as you will see in a few months, we will be doing a report, our annual top 500. And Dutch Bros has some pretty incredible numbers that I just saw with my eyeballs. So get ready for that. It's going to be fun.
But so do the rest of its competitors, right? I mean, because again, like Seven Brew, I'm almost, I'm so impressed with Dutch Bros, but Seven Brew, actually, some of their numbers are almost even more impressive because Seven Brew's been around since 2017, only been around 7 years. Dutch Bros, believe it or not, Dutch Bros is a 32-year-old brand. I think that's another, and I know we need to move on because we're kind of getting a little in the weeds here. But really interesting is like how many of these drive-through coffee brands started in the 90s. They've been around a long time, but it's like this perfect storm of trends right now is really going in favor of a drive-through only, fast service, very straightforward beverage menu. Like that's the place to be right now.
Let's talk a little bit about casual dining because, we mentioned Texas Roadhouse. They are the standout brand. But we saw Bloomin report. And it's kind of a mixed bag. What do you guys think about the future of casual dining? Kind of in light of this weird market where we did our America's Favorite Chains. People love their steak, but it's not necessarily showing in a lot of the sales. So, what's kind of your outlook on this quarterly earnings?
Well, I think broadly, the future of casual dining is fine. But in the immediate future, I think it's suffering from a lot of this value stuff that we're talking about, which is if people are just trying to feed their families, they're going to go someplace they can get, feed the whole family for, I'm not going to say a number because I don't know how much it costs to feed a family of 4, but Sam knows.
A lot.
It's cheaper at Chick-fil-A than it is at Texas Roadhouse. You know what I mean? So, or like BJ's is probably a better number to plug, like brand to plug in because Texas Roadhouse is fine. But in this economy in particular, if you have to pick, like a lot of people, especially families, are gonna pick the more limited service brands that they perceive as being a better value. Now, what's interesting, and again, this will all be in Joanna's feature that's coming out, is that there's actually a lot more that consumers think about when they just think about value. And some of that is service, vibe, as Sam calls it, or ambiance of the restaurant.
Why does your voice change when you say that, ambiance?
Oh, because I'm making fun of you. And
no, ambiance needs a different voice. I totally get that.
Yeah, that's the ambiance voice. Those are places where casual dining can put some emphasis right now. Now, some casual dining companies are finding success by just playing the straight value game. And I imagine, Holly, that you probably talked about Brinker and Chili's last week without me, so I won't focus on that. But so one option is to play up your value messaging, but another option is to really lean into the places where you can win over limited service brands, which is in, the service. If you go to a Shake Shack, you just want to like push the buttons on the screen and get your food. But if you're going to BJ's or Texas Roadhouse, you want to sit down and have a pleasant evening and have, a friendly waiter and like a good experience. And so that is something, and that's something that a lot of casual dining chains are focusing on right now. So I think they face a tougher immediate climb, but I think in the long run, casual dining is, here to stay.
Yeah, you want to sit down and get your bread basket. I hear the bread at Texas Roadhouse is legendary. I used to eat the bread at Cheesecake Factory. Like when you sit down at a casual dining, I want my bread. Like that's the quintessential casual dining. Yeah,
but the biscuits at Red Lobster are great. And how are they doing, right? I mean, so it's not, but yes, I mean, that is something where limited service restaurants cannot meet you there. But Texas Roadhouse being obviously a great example here, which is to say, I always say Texas Roadhouse is the casual dining Chick-fil-A, right? Because what Texas Roadhouse does very well is it is dependable, reliable, consistent, hospitable, and it doesn't, change a ton. It doesn't pretend to be anything it's not. And so because of that reliability, and let's face it, it like Chick-fil-A, it has a presence in all of middle America, right? So there's a Texas Roadhouse, in towns that don't have anything else. My hometown is a great example, like Chipotle and Texas Roadhouse on fast casual, full service, like that's as good as it gets. So it becomes the go-to place, right? So, and that's not, by the way, trying to slander any of these restaurants, because obviously they're very, very high quality, and it's not to understate of the power of middle American business. It's just to say, like, most customers want that dependability, and you don't have to have the wow factor so much. And so that's what Texas Roadhouse does. I think a lot of casual brands get maybe too caught up sometimes in wow factor. I love Applebee's, but sometimes I wonder, it's like, okay, the date night pass. It's like, we're getting a little fancy here. Now that proved to be very successful, right? But you're never going to see something like that at Texas Roadhouse. So to Leanne's point, casual dining will be fine. And to reference those numbers, Holly, that you were mentioning at the beginning, when we look at our America's favorite chains, clearly Americans love a good steak. They love a good, casual dining sit-down restaurant where they can go have an experience. But the fact of the matter is casual dining chains have to win, not just on, are you coming here for your anniversary or your birthday? They got to get you in like once a month. And that takes a lot more work to get them to do that, right? That's where you really need to work harder on, the dependability, certainly, and the hospitality. I want to feel once a month like I'm in a special place. But then think about things like loyalty, right? Think about technology being the backbone of the operation without replacing the hospitality. Like that's where Bloomin in their report, they talked about how technology has helped, specifically like Carrabba's was, I think, their best performing brand at Bloomin. And, they called out some of the successes they've had with technology in the back of the house. So yeah, I think casual dining full service is still figuring things out in this new reality of off-premises everything and speed of service and technology. And it will be fine, but it has to lean into what makes guests feel special, and how do we provide that as much as we possibly can.
Well, I think an interesting opposition to that is Applebee's, which, isn't known for its service. It's known for good deals. Look at the Dollarita, which they just brought back. That is probably something that brings guests in a lot more often than once a month. Like that Dollarita promotion, if you're drinking those dollar margaritas, you're going to get hungry.
You speaking from experience here, Holly?
No, I am not. But,
I forgot. You've probably never been to an Applebee's.
I have. I grew up with an Applebee's, but I wasn't old enough to drink then. So, and it's since closed. So, never had a Dollarita.
Sad times.
But it's the opposite of a place of any of like the Darden restaurants, which we'll talk about when they report, and I'm sure those will be great numbers as well. But them and Texas Roadhouse, they don't discount. They don't do those things. They're more about this service that you were mentioning, Sam. And then we have places like Applebee's and Chili's that just aren't in that vein. They're a little bit more fun. They are looking at a different customer set. We talked last week about a Chili's commercial I saw on TV where they were doing no mascots, and the mascots in the window staring at them, singing, "I want my baby back, baby back, baby back." It's a pretty funny commercial, actually. I really enjoyed it.
Doesn't take much. But I mean, and you probably talked about it, but I mean, Chili's is another good example of a brand that's doing very well. And I mean, this is a whole other conversation, which again, you might already had, but like their advertising right now is so smart. I mean, coming after the QSRs on the value front is so smart. And again, what that represents is, again, getting that customer in more frequently than the special occasion. I don't want to spend $50, whatever. Chili's is like, we're the same price as QSR for the most part. Like you can come here once a week and spend the same as if you go to McDonald's once a week. That's really smart. And we talked about value. Like there's a really good opportunity here for full service restaurants to play with that value equation. And again, of course, you have profit margins and you can't discount too much. But what can you do around bundling? What can you do to maybe decrease the prices of some things while increasing the prices of other things? How can you communicate value? All of those things. This is what guests are looking for. they don't want to spend so much money anymore. They are looking for value, but that doesn't mean strictly fast food or fast casual. It means what is their value equation and how do you solve that equation for them?
I'll just kind of wrap up today's discussion with a little promo for us, which is that we had El Pollo Loco's CMO Patrick Benson on our power list this year. And I think that maybe a contributing factor to El Pollo Loco's success is their use of social media, because they have been blowing up on social media. They have all these great campaigns. They're doing fun things. They did that birria taco last year. They're becoming a really fun, cool, interesting brand aimed at a younger consumer and almost like a Taco Bell competitor. And I think that it's working for them. I think that it's making them cool. They have some new TikTok partnerships that I'm currently writing a story about, so you'll read about that in a little bit, but they're on top of it. They know what's happening in the social world. They know what the next thing is, and they are not afraid to hop on something the second it happens. And I think that that's a good lesson for people because their numbers are doing well. And I don't know if that's a contributing factor, but it's definitely something that's putting them more at the front of consumers' minds than a lot of other brands.
Well, being a part of the conversation, right? Being a part of the zeitgeist, the consideration. And I talked to Ryan Ostrom, the CMO of Jack in the Box for Takeaway last week, and I highly recommend people go listen to that conversation. Because Jack in the Box, Taco Bell, you have these brands that are so entrenched in culture, right? That they have this permission to do a lot of crazy things because of their ability to be a part of that cultural conversation. So what you're saying, Holly, I think for El Pollo Loco, that is a brand trying to become a part of that conversation and probably doing a good job at it and kind of, again, entrenching itself in that way. It's going to be different for every brand. You have to do it in an authentic way. That's one thing we've learned a lot about from, our power list and influencer marketing. Don't do it unless it's authentic. But if you are very much a part of that conversation, you're going to be top of mind for guests. You're going to pop up in ways that they maybe didn't expect. And if you're ahead of in front on the consideration set, then that's going to be very, very good for you in the long run.
All right, well, I'm glad you guys came back this week. I'm glad we're all back together.
Thought about not, to be honest with you.
I got Alicia on deck. She's ready to go.
And she's great. She's
awesome.
Great.
So that makes me feel better
Extra serving forever.
about being sick or busy or whatever I've been lately. I know it's been a while.
All right, well, guys, thank you so much for joining me. And I will see you next week. Thanks so much, listeners.
Thanks, Holly.
Thanks, Holly.
Hi, I'm Joanna Fantozzi, Senior Editor with Nation's Restaurant News, and I'm here with Frank Pacey, CEO of Newk's Eatery. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, I'm my pleasure to be here.
So first of all, how is the conference going for you so far?
Conference is going great. It's always a great time to see what's new, what's out there, get ideas. Now, I used to always say on these conferences, if you at least get one idea that you can come back and will make a difference in the business, it's certainly worth the time that you invest to do it. And it's great to see a lot of the different folks out there that you work with in the industry. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And now I hear it is a 20th birthday celebration this year for Newk's.
That's correct. Newk's was 20 years old as of February. So it's great. We're celebrating that. We're having our franchise conference in July where we're going to celebrate that. So it's been a great time for us.
What has the road been like, or the evolution of the brand from then until now?
Well, as a lot of people may know, Newk's was originally founded by the Newcomb family, who also founded the McAllister's Deli concept. And so it started out in Oxford, Mississippi, and has grown out from that. We have almost 100 locations now for the Newk's brand. Very strong in the Southeast, and we continue to get new franchisees to open. Our newest openings were in McGee, Mississippi, and Bentonville, Arkansas. So.
Oh, that's amazing. And what is, I guess, like your franchising and growth strategy then?
Our strategy is to continue to grow in the Southeast where our brand's known. We feel like we have a lot of white space in those areas in Florida, Carolinas, Texas, Oklahoma. So, places where we already have locations where we think we have a lot more opportunity to grow the brand. So.
The other thing that's pretty new now is that you're under new ownership. So could you tell me a bit about what that's been like and what that transition's been like?
Right. Well, the business was acquired in November by Capital Spring, and we are kind of sister companies with one of their other brands, which is FSC, which is Beef O'Brady's, and the Brass Tap. And so what's been great for us is, having those additional resources. It's interesting, Newk's is a $220 million business. Now combined, we're almost $500 million in terms of the three brands, right? Which just gives us a lot more clout in negotiating, and we're already seeing the benefits of some of that in terms of, we've consolidated some corporate resources in purchasing and development, and we've got opportunities in terms of folks that we're talking to that we have a little bit more power in terms of negotiating, and just just makes us a more important customer to a lot of the vendors that are out there. So.
And I feel like we've seen a lot of moving and shaking around in the industry these days, a lot of mergers and acquisitions. And so I guess, were you concerned with if there were going to be challenges with kind of being under new ownership?
Well, I think anytime you have change, it's always anxious, right? Especially knowing that historically when you bring some brands together, there's always some reduction in staff. We had a reduction in staff in some of the departments that I mentioned earlier. We tried to do it as generously as we could in terms of giving them notice, telling them that, hey, we're going to want to transition, because it wasn't one of these things where we said, hey, we just want to walk away tomorrow. We're going to have to figure out who's going to pick up these things. And so we did that. We gave them some severance benefits, and I'm happy to say that some of the folks, and I've offered to give references to the people that have left. I know that some of the people have already found other positions out there. So I mean, it's that's always a challenge. But I think we handled it as well as we could, and kind of looking forward, people see there's a great opportunity for us. So.
Now, since you are under a much larger umbrella now, what are some of those, benefits or resources that you have access to now that you mentioned before?
Well, as an example, when I look at the development side, right, we had a lot of resources, but they weren't as efficient in terms of, we were trying to recruit franchisees, they're trying to recruit franchisees, we've got a construction and architecture area, they've got that, right? So I think what happens is you can use those resources, you can afford to get additional resources, right, or redistribute those resources from a place where you might have overlap to a place where you have need. And so that's really kind of what we've looked for, and we continue to look at, opportunities as we go forward in some of these areas. Some of it is, consolidation of vendors. We were looking at a vendor to manage our franchise information. They already have one. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of things that you kind of avoid having duplication of efforts, which is just a whole lot more efficient for everybody. So.
And what are you looking forward to? I mean, I guess what's next for Newk's, and what are you looking forward to in the next year or the next 20 years?
Well, one of the things that we've done recently is we've actually bought back some franchises. I think the great thing about our concept is average unit volumes are above $2.2 million a year. And so the units can be very profitable. And we had some where, for whatever reason, the franchisee wasn't developing, or in a business that's been around 20 years, some of these guys have been in a long time and they want to retire and they want to move on. So we've created that opportunity for them. That doesn't mean that we might use those to re-franchise if we get somebody who wants to develop in those areas. So we're continuing, and so as a result, one of the things we're looking at is continuing to build some company units as well as building franchise units, and we've got the resources to do those things now from a capitalization standpoint. So.
How do you figure out how to strike that balance between corporate locations and franchise locations?
Well, I think I think of it in terms of a percentage. I'm not sure we want to have more than, say, 30% of our portfolio be corporate. We are primarily a franchise company, and we want to continue to be a franchise company. But we're going to look for opportunities where, if a franchisee's in the market and for whatever reason they're not developing, do we buy that market back? And we may, again, refranchise it back out to someone else. Part of that is just kind of normal, in my mind, normal portfolio management of the business. So, sometimes trade areas change, and you kind of just adjust with that. So,
as you're looking to develop and grow, what are some of the challenges that you see right now in the market? I'm hearing from a lot of people that there are still some real estate issues out there.
Yes, I think real estate's expensive. Historically, Newk started was more in the 4,000 to 3,500 square feet, even 4,500 square feet. But since COVID, the business has evolved. It's become much more of an off-premise business. At one point in time, we were 60% on-premise, 40% off-premise. We're now more like 55% off-premise and 45% on-premise, which says I don't need to have as big dining rooms as I've had in the past. And so can I reduce the square footage, which, I tend to think of square footage into what's your dollars per square foot. So the biggest way to be able to reduce your costs on rent is to be able to reduce the size. So we're looking at 2,500 square foot prototypes where, given the mix change, I think we can be successful at those smaller locations. So
that mix change is so interesting because we've heard similar stories from people, but I don't think I've spoken to too many people where they went from majority on-premise to majority off-premise. What has that transition been like for the brand, like from a brand perspective?
Well, it's interesting. You have to have the infrastructure to support that. So starting with, online ordering. If you're going to do curbside, we do curbside. I mean, strategically for us, curbside is we already deliver the food to the table. Now you're just talking about delivering to the car. The toughest part for us is because the business wasn't set up that way. In some places, we can't get dedicated parking spaces. But as we go forward, you could see that happening as a way. We've also built a couple drive-throughs recently. So as it becomes more of an off-premise business, and I think part of the challenge, especially in the fast casual world, is a lot of the concepts weren't majority on-premise, right? So I think that's one of the things that's different about us is because we were that majority, you've seen that move, whereas a lot of places were already, if you look at some of the smaller sandwich concepts, there were already a lot of to-go business to begin with, right? And so, for us as a concept, that creates an opportunity to reach people differently, to make it more convenient for them. We've also done phone ordering AI, so that if you call the restaurant, it recognizes your phone number and it says, hey, I noticed last time you had a Newk's sandwich, would you like to order the same thing again, right? So trying to figure out how do we make it as convenient as possible. We've got kiosk in restaurants now as well. So a lot of it is, in my mind, is, people want to be frictionless of, whatever that definition of that is, and how do we make sure that we're meeting those needs for the guests. So.
I'm curious, how did the voice AI, how has that gone? Because I've experienced that from a customer perspective, and sometimes it doesn't understand what you're saying.
Well, it's interesting. The vendor we're using on that actually has, if they notice that they're having difficulty, they have an intervention where the person can come on and say, hey, can I help you with that? It's difficult because I think in general, phone ordering is declining, right? And so the question becomes, how much do you want to invest in that if it's all going to go to digital anyway, right? So we've seen it decline year after year after year. I equate it to, I used to get a paper delivered to my house and for years, and one day I stopped getting the paper delivered, and I've never had it delivered since, right? So I think, as people get more and more used to that, now some customers are never going to do that. What I find that the only time I ever do it with a phone is if I'm driving somewhere and I want to order ahead, right? But besides that, I've gotten comfortable with just doing digitally. So.
Yeah, I think that's everyone.
I'm sitting down with Kelly McPherson, the Chief Technology and Supply Chain Officer for Union Square Hospitality Group out of New York. Kelly, thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
That's a big role, right? And you were
Yeah.
even just telling me it encapsulates a lot more than what I just said, but explain to me a little bit about what you do for Union Square.
Yeah, absolutely. So I wear a few different hats. First and foremost, I started with them of leading technology. So I lead the technology organization, plus I also look after supply chain. And about a year ago, took over design and construction and facilities. So many hats throughout the day, but
how do those things work together? Because like technology and supply chain, I imagine there's some overlap there.
There's some overlap, and I think if you look at it, I have an operations background way back when. So started in operations, so I always had that vantage point. But I also call myself the Chief Problem Solving Officer because across all those different departments, it's about problem solving and putting the right structure and plans together to be able to support the business and grow.
Yeah. All right. So I don't think I have to say this, but Union Square, of course, is Danny Meyer, which is he's a renowned restaurateur. If you don't know who he is, come on, what are you doing? But I'm curious how technology fits into Union Square's plans, because a lot of fine dining concepts within Union Square, of course. Danny's a top-notch restaurateur, but as we all know, technology is really pervasive. So tell me about its role in Union Square.
Yeah, absolutely. And I always look at, and been doing this a very long time, technology is the enabler. And for us, first and foremost, it's about hospitality, right? And creating that human connection. And the way that we can facilitate that with both our staff and with our guests is how can technology bring that to life? And so I talk a lot about how can we bring the art of hospitality and the science of technology together to even create a more memorable, enlightened hospitality experience. And that's what we're focused on.
Could you give me some examples of what that looks like?
Yeah, absolutely. And so the more I can look at from the guest perspective, the more I can know about, say, I'm coming into the restaurant, I can create special one-to-one personalized experiences, without kind of crossing that line of creepiness, if you will, right? But the more I know about you and your past dining preferences or what you like, what you don't like, I can create that moment with you. And so really looking at that from the guest perspective. And then we start to look at technology on the back of the house or from the staff perspective. My kind of mantra to my teams is we have to design technology in a way that gets managers out of the office, right? And get them out on the floor, servicing the teams and servicing the guests. And so how can we create automation through repetitive tasks? How can I be smarter about forecasting or scheduling and some of those? And so that's where the technology comes together.
We spoke on a panel earlier today, and one of the topics we talked about is kind of the difference between front of house technology and back of house technology. And my impression is you see a lot of front of house technology in QSR fast casual because of this sort of customer facing. You can get away with that high tech sort of service. Full service, especially fine dining, I think there's this notion of back of house kind of hidden technology that enhances your labor and their ability to do their job. Does that track with Union Square, and that the tech is kind of a hidden element of it?
I always talk that the tech should be invisible, not invasive. But the front of the house technology is equally as important because you look at, from us, it's the reservation platform, the table management. How can I optimize the tables within the restaurant? And so I think that front of the house and what the maitre d' is looking at when you're coming into the restaurant, right? Really owning that front door. So I think you see it that from the front of the house perspective, and then from the back of the house is how do you just really controlling costs, right? Which becomes really important from a labor and from a food COGS perspective.
Right.
I've been doing this for decades now, and way back then it was all about how do you drive top line and how do you control labor and food costs, your biggest controllables. And I don't think that's changed today. The means in which we can control those things and have visibility into what we're doing, I think has improved, immensely over the past years.
You mentioned that you guys are getting ready to launch a digital platform. Can you share some information?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of our we have a consulting business called Hospitality Quotient. It's really about how do we take our culture and our principles that Danny brought to life in setting the table. And so to kind of create this flywheel of those consulting and those in-person workshops that we do on that, we created a digital learning platform called HQ Plus. We launched it a few weeks ago, and it's really about bringing, again, that content to light about just different ways of how we do business and hospitality as a way of doing business and offering that as a learning platform for other organizations.
Oh, cool.
We believe hospitality transcends industry, and it's applicable across different different industries, if you will.
To that end, it really feels like these days recruiting high quality employees, training them, retaining them, that seems like it must be a high priority for you. So a lot of this tech, leveraging technology with your staff, I imagine you're really trying to recruit and retain the best employees, right? Can you talk about how you use technology to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it starts all the way through the employee life cycle, right? So it's whether it's when they're discovering, if you look at it, how they're applying for jobs and how they're interacting with you and those first impressions on the applicant tracking system, all the way having a very seamless experience as managing them throughout their life cycle. And so efficient scheduling, giving them the visibility on their own, we'd call it a mobile first strategy. And so they're using their own personal devices for seeing their schedule, clocking in and out, communication channels that come direct. Our internet platform we've launched, there's a separate app for that. And we're also now just starting on, which we think is important, is our own branded digital wallet for same-day pay. And so we're just early in the stages of development on that and launching it later this year, but just giving both front of the house and the back of the house the ability to get access to their wages sooner than they would in the payroll cycle.
Sure, yeah. All right, so you must look at technology all the time. You must look at what's around the corner. What are you most excited about from a technology perspective as it relates to the hospitality industry?
Yeah, for me, again, it comes back to data and analytics. And I think really about where I get excited about where kind of Gen AI and AI and kind of predictive can have the most impact is, again, getting managers out of the office so they can service the guests. But, we all look at, for the last, decades, looking at dashboards, looking at metrics, how we can drive the business. And I think, data tells a story. It's like what happened, why it happened, and we're really focused on what do I do about it. And so transforming dashboards and information into storytelling and narratives that can really start to help people drive the needle on the business in very small bites. So we're doing some innovations around that.
Okay.
Some is on innovating on the delivery of how we're doing our reporting, and so looking at how can I create not only the narratives every day of what happened in the business and what they should be focused on today, and we're looking at translating that into voice so you can get a podcast. So think about a chef or a GM commuting into work every day and getting a 3-minute podcast on the recap of what happened in their business yesterday and what they should be focused on. And
That's
so
really interesting.
some of the Gen AI tools are going to allow us to do that. And so we're coming to market with those. So we're really kind of market meaning within our own company. So
It's fascinating.
we're excited about that.
Never heard something like that. That's really interesting. Tell me about, obviously Union Square has multiple concepts in its portfolio. Tell me about the ways in which this is a real strength, leveraging technology across the concepts, but also maybe what you've learned within individual concepts about what you can learn from daily provisions can go to another concept. What does that look like?
Yeah, absolutely. And so when I came in and built, we started to look at the tech strategy, the first thing was unifying the point of sale. And so if you start to look at some of the capabilities of point of sale, we're able to standardize that across all the different concepts, from our fine casual daily provisions all the way up through the modern, right, 2 Michelin star restaurant. And for us, it's really that foundation piece. And again, keep going back to it, allowed us to give a common platform for us to be able to get the analytics back on the backside to really start to look at business performance. And so the way we look at technology is it's the 80-20 rule. 80% of it's going to match be applicable across the different restaurants. And then what are the customizations that we have to do to kind of adapt for the specific brand that we're working on. And so that's what we're really focused on. It's almost kind of like design globally, implement locally, but just within our concepts that we have.
Well, I imagine that will help you to scale as individual concepts scale.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Kelly McPherson of Union Square Hospitality Group, thanks for your time today.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Hi, I'm Joanna Fantozzi, Senior Editor with Nation's Restaurant News, and I'm here with Jim Biddick, COO of Dave's Hot Chicken. How are you?
I'm so good.
And love talking to you, love Dave's brand. And so far, just want to talk about a little bit about what you've learned so far at LLC, what brings you here.
Well, we kind of make this a team trip for our exec team. Every year we bring, 10 or 12 people with us. I keep getting comments, you brought the whole team or you brought an entourage. And we sort of use this event as like a mid-year touch point with our team to like center ourselves around what's going on, what's new, what's up and coming in the restaurant industry. So we look at it as that type of an experience, almost like a team building event for our team, where you get a lot of really valuable content and interesting insights. Last year we were here and we were all sitting around a table in the general session, and Technomic called Dave's the fastest growing restaurant brand in America for the year. And it was a shock for us. We're all picking up our phones and like taking pictures, and it was like a big deal. I think this year we were in the top 3, which was also really cool, just to still be, in that zone, to be one of the top growing brands. So we're always excited. I think it's even more fun when everything's firing on all cylinders, which is sort of where we're at with Dave's right now, that everything's firing on all cylinders. So it's great to come to something like this.
Yeah. And thank you for being the perfect segue to what I wanted to talk about, which is growth, and franchising and all that fun stuff. And new news for you guys, you picked up a really cool new franchisee. And I assume when Usher called and asked to be a franchisee, your response was, yeah.
Absolutely. Actually, it's a funny story. We were trying to get Usher to give us the rights to the Oh My God song. And that whole process led to a conversation about getting involved in franchising. And he actually posted, and I think it's still out there, he posted a video maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago, where I think, if I remember right, he had not spoken the truth to his family. And so the punishment was that he had to eat a Reaper. So he's got this like 4-minute video that he posted on Instagram literally 2 years ago, where he's like eating a Reaper, and it was like, he's like, oh, it's so hot. It's so hot. It's so hot. Which was really fun. So I think he has been in the background, sort of liking Dave's for a while. We met him. We got to go and meet him. I got to shake his hand, where there's the group picture of us, sort of like the entourage that we brought here. All of us, all around Usher, and he seems to be a fan of the brand, and we're excited to have him on board. We actually have several celebrity franchisees. First of all, Drake is our celebrity endorser and investor. We attracted him when there was just one restaurant open, but we've got other people that are sort of in that same celebrity status vein. Chris Humphries, a former NBA star. John Bitto, for people go, who's that? Is like this big deal Canadian businessman. He brought the Toronto Raptors to Toronto. He was a co-owner of that team for a while. He brought Sirius Radio into Canada, and of course, Usher. Yeah, we've been able to attract some really cool investors as well as some really cool franchisees.
Yeah, absolutely. And something I find so interesting is that a lot of the franchisees that you hear about that are well-known people, are celebrities, tend to be athletes. And so I feel like you don't see too many musicians. So that's pretty cool.
It is pretty cool. Yeah, that's true. Actually, yeah. I was at Blaze Pizza for 8 years, and our big celebrity endorser there was LeBron James. But yeah, you're not wrong about that.
And speaking of kind of the development and franchising, I actually recently spoke to your first franchisee in Manhattan. It was great. And I know you're kind of trying to get into new spaces, into new cities. And so kind of what has that journey been like, and where do you want to go next?
So Dave's is an all franchise brand. Literally we operate 5 and a quarter locations, because one of them is a ghost kitchen, and the volumes aren't anywhere near what standard brick and mortar location does. But we have 5 company operated locations out of 200. So what's the math on that? Like 2.5%, right? So 97.5% of our system is franchise owned and operated. And the beauty of that model, one of the pieces that's beautiful about that model is that you go with local franchisees that know their market, that have connections and a reputation within their market. And so many times the quality of the real estate is a direct reflection of the franchisee's sort of local know-how in connection to their local market. So as you find really good sites, or you become available, or really good sites become available for those franchisees, it's really driven by the franchise owners themselves and how well connected they are and how well they know their market. So some of these great sites that we've been able to pick up, yeah, Dave's is a great brand. Yes, landlords and developers want us. But the key piece for our brand is that franchisee that knows what they're doing. And they're multi-unit, multi-brand, super experienced, well-capitalized franchisees. And that's part of the recipe for success that we've been able to capitalize on.
What is the secret to attracting those types of franchisees?
Well, that's interesting because there's a certain amount of luck that they happen to run into it. A lot of our franchise owners right now, not a lot, but like a good portion of them got turned onto the brand by their kids. So I mentioned John Ditto, who's the Canadian businessman. His daughter went to USC, and while she was in school, she tried the Dave's, our sort of like flagship company location, which is in the Fairfax district. It used to be right down the street from Supreme before they moved, and so it's a cool area of LA. And she called her dad and said, "We got to do this." And they bought the rights to all of Canada. They even have a small market, but they're getting ready to open restaurants in Palm Beach, Florida. They have homes in all these places, so it must be nice. But we've got a couple other franchisees that are like, "Oh yeah, my son told me about it," and then they came out and tried it, and they immediately franchised it. We're getting ready to go to the UK, and when we met with that group, the guy said he asked his son, if his son's 17 or 18, if he had ever heard of Dave's, and he's like, "Dave's!" Like he flipped out. He thought Dave's was so cool. So there's something about the brand and attracting young folks, but also some of the standard stuff. Our franchise sales team, which used to be a team of one named Shannon Swenson, and she just single-handedly sold like 600 locations during COVID. Based on her connections and her know-how, she helped grow the Twin Peaks brand. And she just, sort of just used all of the tricks of the trade that she learned there. And then we brought in Carolyn Kennedy, who did Blaze Pizza and Buffalo Wild Wings. And, by building a great team, they just know how to drum up sales and interest. So.
And all these brands seem to have a lot in common, which is quickly growing brands. So I think that that's really interesting. And I guess, what would you say is, are some of the biggest challenges that you are facing right now when it does come to tune health?
Yeah. Well, let me add one thing to the last thing.
Oh, yes.
Once we get one franchisee in that's like a Dunkin' Donuts franchisee, when they see the unit level economics, when they actually open a restaurant and it just blows the doors off, they immediately tell each other. So there's a big piece of word of mouth. A franchisee by the name of Raj Patel in Chicago. And I think he has almost single-handedly attracted like another 4 or 5 Dunkin' Donuts franchisees. And Dunkin' Donuts franchisees have money and they are willing to put, a lot into building the brand. And so there's a lot of that to it as well, just that word of mouth. So sort of like how anything grows. So within the franchise community, we've got a bit of that behind us also. What was the other question?
Oh, yeah. Well, actually, now I want to piggyback on what you said.
Okay.
So I'm actually curious. You mentioned Dunkin' a couple of times. What do you think attracts Dunkin' franchisees to the Dave's brand?
I think Raj Patel does. I think he was the first one in the door. I think they were looking for, they're a big group. They own something like 92 Dunkin's. He has a goal of getting to 100. They do a lot of it through acquisitions. But he was also a franchisee of Jersey Mike's at one point. They are franchisees of Tide dry cleaning shops. They're franchisees of McAllister's Deli. And he's a franchisee of another brand called Chorizo that you probably haven't seen or heard of, but sort of a new small brand that's up and coming. I think they were just looking to try to diversify and find other stuff. And he ran across Dave's, chased it down for their company, and about a year later was opening Dave's locations. I think he's up to 8 or 10 locations, and he just took on another territory. And that's really the mark of, I think, a quality brand, or at least a brand that if you want to keep opening more, you're willing to buy additional territories. It's really easy to advocate for it within, the franchise community you're a part of. I think he's on their advisory board at Dunkin'. He's a big deal. He's a big deal at Dunkin'. And so he sort of like started drumming up interest for us. So he's part of the Pennsylvania deal. He just signed on for St. Louis. So I mean, there's a lot of positive energy and brand mojo behind franchisees that love it and that want to keep developing it. So
Yeah, sounds great. So obviously one of the, as we know from Technomic, one of the fastest growing brands out there right now. So what is a development challenge, if any, for one of the fastest growing brands in America right now?
quality of real estate or available real estate is probably I would say the largest challenge. I happen to be in a very unique and very positive situation with Dave's. I'm not only the president and chief operating officer of the company, I'm also a member, meaning I'm also a franchisee, which our CEO, Bill Phelps, facilitated and made happen. When I first started talking about taking on this job, I said, I want to be a franchisee so we can make that happen. I kind of rolled my eyes like, sure, like, we'll see. And within a year, he said, are you ready to do it? And I said, yeah, like for reals? Like, and so our CFO and another franchisee partnered together and started making big restaurants. We have 2 open and another one coming in about 2 or 3 months. And then another one a year from now. And it's 6-7 unit territory, which should blow through. It's in the Inland Empire of California. So we've got 2 and a third coming, a 4th one on its way. There's Bill Fox right there. And hi. Listen, I don't know. I'm part of a hot brand. So anyway, he made it happen. He said, you ready to do this franchise? And I said, he goes, any money? That's some. And he even loaned me the money to get into it. So
That's amazing.
We probably have more than half of our executive team, our C-suite, are franchise owners. It's sort of a model that he perfected at What's His Pretzels when he founded that brand and grew that. And not only does it tie me like very deeply to the brand, I care very much about the economics and on making sure that it's a great model for our franchisees in the system.
Yeah.
It's an amazing thing. That grateful to have been bestowed upon me and all of that. I get some people to go, isn't that a conflict of interest? And I say, no, I think it's actually a confluence of interest.
Right.
I think it aligns us and the franchisees so well because now I'm a player coach or whatever. Like I get it. Like I understand. And when we make decisions about what we're going to roll out or what we're going to do, I have a literal stake in it. Like more than just the franchisor.
Absolutely.
So it's been really cool.
I think that's a great note to end on.
Yeah.